Hello. I wanted to continue my conversation around the subject of death, grief, loss, and bereavement. Um, and today I wanted to look at the stages of grieving. And through a lot of research, there have been various models bandied about to basically help somebody understand the process that they're going to go through. But I think the models get very misunderstood, I guess, in the sense that people think that this is a model of practice, but actually what it's describing is the process that you can go through. There's a woman called Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, and she, through research, came up with the model, the 5 stages of grieving. That was the original piece of research that she did. There's now a more modern version that she's added 2 other stages to make 7 stages of grieving. And I think the thing to understand, if you are a person that doesn't work within therapy or counselling, that it's not a formula that you use in order to process your feelings. As a therapist, somebody that's done training and specialised in training in grief and loss and bereavement, it's a model that helps us to understand that these are natural processes that people do go through, but it doesn't mean that it's a rigid or linear process because everybody is different. We're unique in the way that we grieve, even though it might be similar to someone else's. So I wanted to talk about it and actually start to maybe help people that are using it as an idea that it's helpful to practice or to suggest to somebody. It's really about normalizing the feelings and recognizing that these processes do happen, but you may not ever go through all of them. You certainly won't go through them in the order I'm going to talk about it. And you can shuttle forwards and backwards through various parts of this process. So, what are the 5 stages? So, we have denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. That's the original 5. Um, the denial aspect describes a feeling of shock or disbelief, an initial numbness to buffer the initial shock. If you imagine the shock of something happening really quickly, falling over, um, it can leave you feeling, how did that happen? A near miss, etc. Well, imagine if the death is because of a car crash, suicide, a heart attack, or because somebody else has committed a crime, a murder or manslaughter. The denial is very common. Can't have happened. You wake up and think it's unbelievable. So you go through a stage that Kubler-Ross described as denial. She then goes on to say anger can manifest feeling angry with yourself, at others, at God, or the person that has died, and a sense that the loss feels incredibly unfair. And anger is something that a lot of people recognize and think is really bad. Anger at the person that's died, how can that be? It's surprising, but you may not experience it, and that's okay. But if you do, it's understandable. And again, it's pertinent to you. So don't expect it, but if it happens, it's very common and part of the process potentially. The next suggestion is bargaining, and this is one I find quite hard to get my head around. But the more I look into this, the more I begin to understand it. So bargaining, Kubler-Ross says that you're essentially making if only statements or making a deal, like a deal with God. if somebody has died, maybe let me die, let them live. If somebody's in the throes of dying, take me instead, and my life can save theirs. It's often to do with a sense of guilt in an attempt to change the situation or the outcome because that's desperately what you want. So bargaining, it's not obvious, but it does happen. Some people experience it. In my experience, some people don't as well. The next potential part of the process is depression. This is something I find is very common. Depression, I've spoken about. Depression from grief is signifying what depression is really all about. It's exhaustion and emerging feelings where you experience deep sadness, hopelessness, loss of perspective, loss of direction. It can come in waves and it can feel overwhelming and it's exhausting. That's basically describing depression. Depression does seem to be something that a lot of people go through. Some people don't go through it for a long time because they push on and they're strong and they keep going. But eventually it kind of catches up with them. Some people process it really well. If it's a good death, that might seem a little bit callous to say that, and I don't mean it like that. How can there be a good death? What I'm referring to is the manner of the death. If it's a good death in the sense that a person has died in their sleep after a really long, happy life, the process of grieving can potentially be much shorter in the sense that you experience these feelings, sensations, thoughts, etc., for a shorter period of time. You make peace with the death a little more quickly because it's the natural order of things. If the death is not expected or it's expected but it's been going on and on and on and on for a long time, like terminal illness, then you're going to be tired, and that will potentially bring on a sense of everything feeling hard, and that can lead to depression. Then we move into what is the last stage, and that's acceptance. So basically, Kübler-Ross says, acknowledging the reality of the loss, beginning to adjust to a new normal without the person who has died. When I say normal, a new way of living. That I don't think there is any such thing as normal. These are Kübler-Ross's words, but a new way of going about living. Acceptance doesn't mean that you're no longer sad. Acceptance doesn't look like I'm fine, no longer affected by it. Acceptance is way, way deeper than that. It's accepting that you're not going to see them again. You don't think of, you hear a story or something happens and you pick up the phone to call them. Acceptance is this whole process where your mind and body align and it sits in reality with you. Doesn't mean you're happy about it, but you are adjusting. You're adjusting to a new way of being, a new chapter without them. Some years later, with further research and understanding, Kübler-Ross found that there were other important considerations to add into that. So her 7 steps or stages of grieving now are, the first thing that she talks about is shock and disbelief, which we have already covered. Denial, which we've already covered. Guilt. Guilt is an interesting one. Guilt in the true meaning of the word is that you feel that you've done something that you need to repent for, make better. Guilt in the process of grieving can be that you laughed and you're happy. Guilt can be that you didn't get to say you're sorry if you had a row and didn't get to speak to them again. Guilt can be that you didn't wave goodbye, you just left the house to go to work. Just saying goodbye as you left the house without looking at that person. Guilt could be that you hadn't spent enough time with them. Guilt can be so many things. You haven't done anything wrong. You can't repent for that, but you do feel this sense of guilt potentially around living and maybe even moving forward. If you were in a relationship, in a romantic relationship with that person, maybe moving into a new relationship, you will potentially feel guilt. Maybe you have a pay rise. Maybe you have lots of money because that person's died. You can feel guilt. Then we look at the stage of anger and bargaining, depression, which we've already spoken about, but reconstruction. That is a part where you are rebuilding, as it means you're reconstructing your life, but it's an accepted part of the process rather than it getting amalgamated into many senses. A new chapter, you move forward without them. You are reconstructing your life. I spoke about coming back to yourself in a previous post, coming back to yourself after the loss, finding yourself again, but you are forever changed by it. Reconstruction really kind of means that you're building your life around your grief. And it's a recognized thing that grief doesn't really change. You build your life around it and then move into acceptance. So the important considerations around knowing a model like this, whether you're working with people who are bereaved or whether you yourself are going through this process, grief is not linear. You will shuttle back and forth between stages and experience several emotions, sometimes all at once, waves of grief. It's like a roller coaster of feelings. And a lot of people will describe, I feel nothing, I feel everything. And it's important to understand that it doesn't, there's no process in the sense that it takes, everything happens in order. It doesn't. Shuttling between all of these stages, some of these stages, is a very natural thing, and everybody's unique in the way that they grieve. There is no time limit. Anybody that tells you that there is a time limit is setting you up potentially for a huge problem. Grief takes time. There is no normal or right way or right speed to grieve, and everyone has their own way of dealing with it. Some people will want to talk about it all the time, forever and ever, amen. Some people will want to talk about it a little bit, but only with certain people. Some people won't want to talk about it at all. It doesn't mean that their grief isn't happening. It just means that that's their process. But there is no time limit as to when that might come out. If they're not talking about it, there's no time limit as to when it will stop. There's no time limit on any of it. So please remember that if you are supporting somebody who's grieving, or if you yourself are going through it, give yourself time and don't put pressure on yourself. It takes time. And mourning is such an important part of the process. And I keep banging on about process. The reason I do that is because there's no way around it. You cannot go over it, you cannot go under it, you cannot go around it. Grief needs to be processed. Grief needs to be felt and dealt with. And the only way that you can do that is by mourning, grieving the loss of that person. And the manner in which you express that mourning is potentially going to be very different for lots of reasons, but the ones I'm thinking of right now are cultural or religious reasons, or just, your way of doing things, and that may not be cultural, but your family culture, your community's culture. And it's really important to respect that. It's really important as a person witnessing someone's grief, not to tell them how to do it, not to suggest that, they should or shouldn't go to a place of worship or visit the grave or put the photographs out. Everybody is different, and different cultures express their grief very differently. I can think of several cultures where it's natural for the people to wail and sob and publicly grieve. I can think of generations where you didn't show your feelings, the British stiff upper lip. But it's really important not to place an expectation on anybody or yourself. And it's really important to be respectful of whatever that process is for whomever it is for, because you can be very alienated if you have an opinion, and that person may not feel that they can trust you if you pass a judgment on them, or if you expect, because you have a certain culture, that somebody else should be doing it that way. It's really important to be respectful. So I've spoken about Kübler-Ross's models, the older and the newer, and the considerations around the process. And I hope that has been helpful. I think the only thing that is certain is that it is difficult. And I hope that understanding how somebody might experience the process of grieving, or what you might expect if you are going through a loss or have been through a loss, I hope that that's normalised it for you a little bit. And it's an interesting model. And Kübler-Ross has written quite a lot of stuff that's interesting to read around grieving. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. So I hope that's been helpful, and I hope it makes sense. And thank you for listening.